Welcome back, Tribe. I have an episode here for how money works. Private equity is a terrible investment, and who keeps giving them money?
20 years ago, if you asked the average person what they thought about private equity, they would probably have no idea what you were talking about. The business was a small, unglamorous, and overlooked side of finance that people went into if they couldn't land a job at a hedge fund where the real money was made. Since then, though, changes in regulations, investor preferences, and the availability of cash has allowed the industry to grow to over 20 times its size back in 2000. In that time, it minted dozens of billionaires, acquired millions of businesses, developed a bad reputation, and simply grown too big for its own good. The thing that originally made private equity a competitive investment was its small size and understated operations. But not unlike a parasite that has outgrown its host, the biggest threat to private equity today is private equity. Deals are getting harder to find, fees are getting harder to justify, and returns are simply not worth the risk. Now, I know that you might think this sounds like a problem for wealthy investors and asset managers, not you. But the whole system only works by borrowing a lot of money through business structures that look like this and assuming that things will keep growing forever. If that doesn't happen, there are now trillions of dollars in loans that could go bad. And I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but that is going to be a problem for you. So if private equity has become such a bad investment, who keeps on giving them money?
What do you do out here in New York City?
I'm in finance.
Like what exactly?
Private equity.
What is the most amount of money you made in a single year?
$500,000.
$500,000.
Yeah.
Companies that are owned by private equity firms are significantly more likely to go bankrupt.
The endless shrimp is not the reason Red Lobster is in bankruptcy. The fundamental problem is that Red Lobster got involved in what's called private equity.
You can't keep doing that. You know why? Because the ratio of the debt of the United States has become unsustainable.
People forgot about the 70s and the 80s corporate raiders. This is the end result of all of that. Basically, they take over companies, sell off assets, destroy what's left as they do that, and then exit.
Okay, so a quick refresher on what private equity is and how it actually works. Private equity simply means any investment made into businesses or assets that are not listed on public securities markets. Technically, if you invest a few $1,000s into a local cafe, you are a private equity investor. Now, what actually brings all the boys in sleeveless vests to the yard are dedicated private equity funds that raise money from a pool of high-profile investors and use that to buy entire businesses, the so-called buyout funds. These kinds of private equity firms will take their investors' money, put in a little bit of their own, and then borrow as much as they can to fill up a pool of capital that they can then use to make acquisitions. Once they buy up a portfolio of real companies, producing real products and generating real cash flows, they get those businesses to take out big loans to pay money back to them through a special dividend. This means that the founding partners of these firms can own billions of dollars worth of assets while only having invested a tiny fraction of their own money. But it doesn't stop there. The private equity company isn't actually responsible for any of the loans that its portfolio companies take out that begins and ends with the companies themselves. It's like if you own shares in Walmart, you aren't responsible for the company's loans if they fail to repay them. The most you can lose is the money you invested if your shares go to zero. In the case of private equity, what this lets them do is go back to a bank and show them a big portfolio of private businesses, which they can use as security to get you yet another loan. These are called net asset value loans, but since they are loans taken out against companies that already have loans, they are normally just called leverage on leverage, or leverage squared, which does sound familiar. Anyway, the debt doesn't stop there. Remember that money that the wealthy investors and private equity partners put in to get the whole firm started in the first place? Well, normally even that money is borrowed, because investment loans are a very tax-efficient way for wealthy investors to gain exposure to these firms. But it gets worse. One of the downsides of private equity is that, by definition, it's private, as in not listed on public markets. That means it can be difficult for investors to turn their holdings in the firm into cash when they need the money. Fortunately for them, there are firms that will buy stakes in private equity firms from investors called secondaries funds. Now, regulations actually prevent these secondary funds from using debt to fund their acquisitions. Except, of course, that's not true at all. Most of their purchases are indeed also financed with debt. So if you are keeping track, they will take on debt to buy a stake in a firm originally purchased with debt that was used as a down payment on more debt to buy a business that took on debt to deliver paper returns to a fund, which used those returns to qualify for more debt to buy more companies that could be used to take on more debt. But anyway, that's still not everything. So far, this kind of lending has been really profitable, which is why it's not just banks getting in on the action. Some private equity firms have specialized in just lending money to private companies and other private equity firms rather than acquiring the companies themselves. Now that sly bastard Dan Toomey beat me to it again, but these private credit firms have exploded in scope and scale over the last decade, and
you're only feeling it now, I mean, close to home, because they started buying out your homes now. So after destroying a multitude of businesses and getting rich off of it and growing like leeches in Wall Street, continuing to basically dwindle down medium-sized businesses so that only large conglomerates are left, because those are, unaffordable to buy, of course. And once they've sold off all these assets to God knows who, and then discarded the carcass of what was left from the business, they came after your homes next. So then private equity started making a ton of money, basically kicking you out of the dream of owning a home. And that's how we got here. If you guys remember the last Republican that ran against Obama, Mitt Romney, he was one of the more famous corporate raiders. You should read up on him. So he specialized in leveraged buyouts. He was the guy that co-founded Bain Capital. Basically a roundabout way of saying layoffs or cost cutting and straight up bankruptcy.
now have over $1.6 trillion in lending within the USA alone, according to data from Preqin, a financial research firm. The exact scale of this lending is hard to know exactly, because since these private credit firms are not officially banks, and they are lending to private companies with no public reporting obligations, it can be very hard to get reliable data. Now, you're never going to be able to guess where these private credit firms get their money to do this lending. Yeah, that's right. They borrow it. This endless cycle of leverage on leverage on leverage is why private equity has been able to scale so rapidly and generate so much money for the people working in all of these different organizations. But this money still had to come from somewhere, and statistically, it's come from you. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what happens when all of this debt unravels the other way. This video is sponsored by Odoo. Investment managers charge fees for the privilege of managing your money, which further puts them statistically behind over the leverage. Endless backdated research has effectively found the same thing. Any investment managers that have outperformed the market in the past have done so almost entirely because they got lucky. Funds that get lucky generally outperform in the future and tend to underperform over the following years. This trend can actually be worse than straight up gambling because it's a highly efficient way to destroy wealth. Now, the infamous Cathie Wood generated outstanding returns through her ARK Innovation Fund by basically going all in on one of the biggest hype stocks of all time. In particular, her outstanding performance in 2020 attracted a lot of investors to buy into the fund, right before it lost 70% of its value and has since delivered weak overall returns. Since its inception in 2014, the fund has delivered 200% returns, which is only slightly worse than the 226% the S&P returned over the same time period. But most ARK investors did not buy in back in 2014. They bought up here at peak hype. So even though the fund has performed okay overall, most investors are holding huge losses. On top of this, active investment managers charge fees for the privilege of managing your money, which further puts them statistically behind over the long term compared to a passive, diversified, low-cost index fund. The fees charged by private equity funds are generally some of the highest in the industry, sometimes charging clients 5 to 10 times more in fees than even regular actively managed funds, which means that in an efficient market, they would fall even further behind. Now, the rich people and institutional investors that give money to private equity managers know this. The research is not new, and it's been widely accepted for decades at this point. So then, who keeps giving private equity so much money? Well, hot take alert, but the original idea of private equity was actually really good. Now, I know a lot of you are furiously typing in the comments already, because yeah, private equity has turned into an incredibly destructive monolith, but it didn't start out like this. For investors, it actually could beat the market, because it had nothing to do with the market. Private equity didn't deal with listed companies, so it didn't have to compete with all the nerds on Wall Street that did mathematics PhDs at Penn to eke out 3 basis points of alpha. Instead of trying to find hidden value in terabytes of market data, private equity instead invested in smaller local businesses and actively added value by combining their business acumen with the skills of the previous owners. A lot of small business owners are really good at their craft, but they lack formal business training, so they don't optimize things like marketing, accounting, tax management, or expansion opportunities. In theory, the management teams from private equity could find these businesses, make their improvements, and maximize the returns of good, honest businesses to beat the market consistently. In the early days, this was not a job that finance bros wanted to be doing, because instead of hanging out in Manhattan high-rises working on glamorous deals, they would be setting up bookkeeping software for a regional plumbing company in Ohio. Over time, people noticed that they could make a lot of money and charge a lot of fees for this kind of groundwork, which made it more attractive than even top investment banks or hedge funds. But this has started to change for 3 reasons. The first problem is that as the popularity of private equity has grown, it's become harder to find businesses worth buying. Back in the early days, when the industry was still in its infancy, small business owners would find it really difficult to sell their businesses because
I also wonder, because the nature of business has changed too. In the economy that we're living in, digitized businesses on the internet are basically what everybody starts today. Even if you're working out of your garage making a product, you sell it online. You put it on Amazon, on Etsy, on eBay, whatever. If it's a service that you offer, or consultations, even that, some people are their own businesses and they do consulting. The percentage of businesses that are started with hard assets and services that require you to go door to door to people's houses or sell to a business, something like that, probably pale in comparison to the structure of modern day self-employment. Especially with the advent of AI right now, a lot of private equity is losing that appeal that it had in the very beginning. Like, they got priced out by AI. You don't need anybody to do business optimization for you, marketing for you, any of that. You literally feed the AI your business, a bunch of your hard data, all your spreadsheets, everything, the problems you're having, and it'll come up with exactly what private equity used to do for people at the cost of something like $20 a month. That's it, $20 a month. And then it'll tell you what software. It finds the perfect software for you, how to install it, hold your hand, tell me in a step-by-step process for an idiot who's never touched QuickBooks how to install QuickBooks and set it up. Boom, did it for you. Tell me step-by-step process how to do XYZ. Boom, tells you. Tell me where to find the best accountants that deal with this specialized problem I'm having. Boom, done. Hey, I need a lawyer for this exact problem. Boom, done. Hey, can you find? Boom, done. And it'll literally do. It can be your accountant. It can be your lawyer also. But, you know, hey, it pays to have really good ones on a retainer. But yes, rapidly it's becoming AI-powered. You will have AI-powered lawyers, AI-powered accountants coming in the very near future. After a few more iterations, they will be as good as the best lawyers or better, and they never miss anything. Amongst other things, yes, we're headed into a very hyper-productive society. White collar is going to get absolutely decimated. I'm sure you've seen all the headlines that are coming down the pipeline. Mass layoffs, AI to replace 50% of jobs, white collar most affected, blah, blah, blah. Because the reality is setting in very, very shortly here in our real life that most people that went to school, work in those very nice glass towers, won't have a job soon. That's the truth.
because not many people have the capital and the expertise to run something like an HVAC company or mechanic shop. Because of this, private equity firms could normally acquire a business for just 2 to 3 times their annual earnings, meaning even if they didn't make any improvements, they would theoretically be making strong returns just for maintaining operations. But as more firms got into the game, the people selling their businesses had more offers coming in, which meant new PE firms had to make bigger and bigger bids to secure acquisitions. According to First Page Sage, a research firm that collects data on this industry, the average HVAC company now sells for a multiple of between 5 and 10 times their earnings. Now, this data is really hard to collect because the details of private equity business sales don't need to be publicly disclosed. This particular report is just a guesstimation based on network feedback, expert interviews, and internal databases. Even based on these rough numbers, a business that pays 10 years to cover its purchase price is no longer beating the market after fees and expenses, which means that private equity firms had to start pushing their portfolio companies harder to squeeze out more profit and then flip them for big capital gains. Now, for a while, this worked because of a fun little trick they could pull in a growing market. After private equity firms improved the businesses they acquired, they could sell it for a profit. And over time, the largest buyer of businesses sold by private equity firms were other private equity firms. Because new firms were paying more and more for acquisitions every year, this made returns look incredibly strong because they were literally pumping their own market. These strong returns attracted more investment and allowed private equity companies to take on more debt to buy more businesses, driving up prices, which created strong returns for the people who got in early. This little feedback loop generated incredible returns and made the long-term risks someone else's problem, so it incentivized the second problem.
Jeez.
Once firms ran out of good, stable businesses with solid cash flows to acquire, they had to look.
It's a Ponzi scheme. That's literally, you just described a Ponzi scheme, basically. Buy a business, do the bare minimum, sell it to someone else. They do another round of bare minimum, boom, sell it to someone else, and round around it goes. You take a business that's really worth $100,000, and now it's worth millions, but not much has changed. Unbelievable. It's like house flippers, basically. They do the bare minimum on a house, which was what, by the way, private equity brought that idea in. They were buying people's houses up, renovating them, bare minimum, and then coming around months later, listing the property for an exorbitant amount of money, which priced out the middle class. And then who came and bought that? Maybe some other private equity that was a bigger player. And then on it goes. No shit.
Look for riskier options to pull the same trick with. That either meant paying more for businesses in good, stable industries or looking at questionable businesses in risky industries. It didn't really matter because the point was to flip them to the next buyer. As a random example, there is a good chance that some of your favorite YouTube channels are now owned by private equity firms. Look, YouTube channels can be great businesses, but they are just inherently riskier than something like an established carpentry company that has been operating for 3 generations. The race to find more businesses means that risks like these will become more common. The other problem with feedback loops is what happens when they start to go in the other direction. Over the last 2 decades, the conditions have been perfect for private equity to grow. Interest rates have been low, there were lots of businesses to acquire, and people wanted an alternative to real estate and the stock market. But that's changing. Baby boomers are aging out of their businesses in record numbers, which is putting more supply back onto the market. Small business owners are also more savvy than they were 20 years ago. Everything you would ever need to know about running a business effectively is available online, which means there isn't as much.
Yeah, you could either Google it and do the research yourself or hire a powerful AI to do it for you. I'm telling you guys, the paid difference between free and the $20 plans that give you access to those, quote, reasoning models that they call them, is night and day. For daily driving, for help on anything, for it to stop giving you bad information, also known as hallucination, the paid models are head and shoulders above what you get on the free plans. It's, I would argue to say, it is most likely the best $20 a month you can absolutely fucking spend in the world today. I don't think there's a better value proposition. If you have Netflix, cancel that garbage. If you have Hulu or Amazon Prime or, I keep Amazon Prime because you could get a lot of shit quickly. But subscription services like that to Disney and all this, cancel them. Get yourself the Pro plan or whatever the $20 plan is, whatever they call that shit, and start using those models to teach yourself things, to feed them data, to have them analyze, and to make your life much easier. It's almost the perfect assistant, and they get better constantly. As I says, I'm increasingly convinced that essentially all finance is just a Ponzi scheme on top of another Ponzi scheme, etc. It is. It's just money changing hands, but the value of things somehow increases. It's just debt, leverage, and speculative all the way down. Exactly. Let me tell you, every crafter lady in the U.S. knows about private equity now after the Joann's debacle. Yeah, I got approached by private equity too. Or you call them, whatever. These business enhancers selling you pipe dreams. Listen, bro, if you just partner with us, your channel, we can explode it 10x. We'll handle everything for you. Thumbnails, script writing, collaborations, and all this other shit. Content ID. They'll make sure that everything is content ID so nobody could rip your content and just for the small price of your whole fucking soul and most of your profits, we'll do this for you. Yeah. No thanks, bro. I'm a one-man army over here. I do everything by myself. Okay, with the help of AI. I have a digital assistant, but thumbnailing, keep it basic. Scripting, not really. We're just talking. Videos, whatever we find interesting. Editing, well, my editor's basically automated to cut off any dead space in sound. So my videos get auto cut already. So I'm not wasting hours just checking for dead space where nothing's happening, nobody's doing anything. And then streaming. So we just started streaming too. Shout outs to everybody that tunes in. We'll be doing another stream. Check the schedules. And that's it. This is about as lean as you could possibly run a business. Yeah, the cost up front matter depending on what you buy, but this is what I mean by self-owned businesses or making stuff. Like you make something in your house, you'll need molding, you'll need materials for the injection, for example, or you'll need some tooling for metal or wood or whatever. So the upfronts of a business always have a cost. I mean, unless you're selling something purely digital or software, which requires coding, which a lot of the bots could help now. The LLMs could help you with coding, like, for example, Claude. But regardless, yes, cameras cost money. Laptops cost money. Monitors, they cost some money. Microphones here, they cost some money. The microphone's hand that holds it up, the little Stream Deck key, okay, fine, but you can get by running super lean. You could get a very basic camera, you get a very basic mic, and you have a laptop, and you could run that to record already. You just need another cheap monitor. You could get them for $80 these days, little cheap mobile monitors. So you get so honestly, most people have a laptop and plug in a monitor. You just need a mic. You could get a basic one for like $50. Camera, get something used from, whatever, like Facebook Marketplace or whatever you're using. That's it. Boom, you have your lean running business, technically, to start a reaction or a live stream channel. Then if you want to go out and record the world and do shit on your own, you can get one of these. And this is basically everything you need encapsulated. This is just an example, guys. You don't have to start this kind of business, but obviously I do this as a business, so it's an easy example for me to give. It's called the DJI Pocket 3. I recommend everybody get one of these if you're interested in this line of work. And it comes with everything. Here's the microphone. The camera is here. And it even comes with a little tripod. And this is what I use to record the little walk-in talks. I forget what the Pocket 3 combo is, $700, I think. Obviously, you could get a bare bones version that doesn't come with all this extra shit, but I would highly recommend because this is the entire thing. This is your entire business enclosed. That's it. And then you put that on your laptop and you chop it up. You edit it. So, and editing software is free. You don't need to even pay for editing software these days. And that's a business, and that's super lean. And private equity can't help you with shit like this. There's no cost. There's no, if you're trying to start a roastery, the roastery machines for the coffee, those cost a lot of fucking money. You need some upfront capital to acquire and go from a coffee shop that buys its beans to a coffee shop that buys, specialty beans to a whole nother level of a roastery that you roast your own beans, period. And you have unique product. You can't get this coffee anywhere else because we roast them in-house. That stuff, apart from the brick and mortar and, the espresso machines and, all the other products that you would need. That stuff is capital intensive. But with the advent of the internet, there are businesses that you are your own business. You're your own self-employed. Well, really, we're talking self-employment, not a business in the traditional sense of you have employees. But I mean self-employment is never been easier in the world today with the advent of this kind of technology. We're just using YouTube as an example because, we're watching on YouTube. But honestly, truly, you can have a $20 subscription plan to the latest, ChatGPT or whatever model that you like to use. I use all of them. I have all three of the major ones, all of them, the paid plans, some on the Ultra, paying $200 a month for that shit because there is a difference. And I do use them often. So highly recommended, boys. From the point of ideation to the finished product, it could help you every step of the way. Anyways, links on the description below if you want to watch the rest of the video or the channel, how money works. They put out boss content. See you on the next one.